Hello, everyone. Welcome to Project First Steps training on the cycle of domestic violence. Project First Step is a pro bono project. It's a collaborative partnership operated by CCLS, the Fresno County Bar Association, the Marjorie Mason Center, Centro La Familia, and the Fresno County Women Lawyers. Through the project, we recruit pro bono attorneys to represent domestic violence survivors in court to help them obtain their permanent restraining orders. We're very pleased today to present a training on the cycle of domestic violence. The training today will be presented by Leticia Campos, the Chief Program Officer at the Marjorie Mason Center. Leticia has been with the Marjorie Mason Center for nearly 15 years. Prior to her role as Chief Programs Officer, she provided direct client services as a victim advocate. In her current role, she oversees all of the direct client services departments, ranging from the 24/7 emergency response services, as well as safe housing, community-based services, permanent housing, children's services, prevention and education, clinical operations, and the Life Transitions Program. Leticia has served as a member of the Project First Step Steering Committee, representing the Marjorie Mason Center, and she has provided this important training for us on several occasions. We're very pleased to have her back today and appreciate service on this program. I'm going to turn it over to Leticia.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Tiffany, give me a nod if you can see my screen. Yeah. Can you see it in presentation mode? Good. All right. All right. Thanks, Sean. So like Sean said, I'm Leticia Campos. I oversee all of our client service departments at the Marjorie Mason Center. And as she mentioned, I did serve for a very long time in the capacity of a victim advocate. And for a very long time, as long as I've been here with the agency, we have partnered with CCLS, specifically through the Project First Step initiative, assisting survivors of domestic violence in obtaining their permanent restraining orders. Both of our agencies combined with the victim advocates, in addition to the critical work of pro bono attorneys, and of course, with the survivor, we have been able to support and empower and help an immense number of survivors through this initiative. So today, what my focus is on is to take you through what the Marjorie Mason Center does, our reach in the community, our reach with clients, the cycle of violence, and again, towards the end, how we have intersected with Project First Step. So we always start with this, with our mission statement at the end of the day. Marjorie Mason Center supports and empowers adults and their children affected by domestic violence while striving to prevent and end the cycle of abuse through education and advocacy. One of the things that I always make mention of when it comes to this mission statement is it's not that old of a mission statement. I would say it's about 10 plus, probably about 10 years young. And the reason for that is prior, definitely around the time that I first started with the agency, it used to say that Marjorie Mason Center supports and empowers women and their children. And the reason why that was updated is because domestic violence, as we know, doesn't discriminate. It impacts and affects every person. It doesn't matter what their socioeconomic status is. It doesn't matter what their culture is. Doesn't matter what their race is. Doesn't matter what their gender is or how they identify. Domestic violence is fluid and impacts all. So what is it? What is domestic violence? It can be defined as a pattern of abusive behavior that is used by an intimate partner to gain or maintain power and control over the other intimate partner. And that's straight from the U.S. Department of Justice. One of the things that I want everybody to keep in mind is when we talk about domestic violence, it's such a broad category and people use it in different contexts. But for the Marjorie Mason Center, our core focus, our mission at the end of the day is to assist those that have been impacted by DV through intimate partner relationships. And so sometimes we'll get clients that come in that have been impacted by family violence. Sometimes we get clients that come in that have been impacted by violence through a friend or someone that they know. But again, for Marjorie Mason Center, we're looking at and focused on the domestic violence between intimate partners, whether that's current or whether that's previous, and definitely, obviously, if they share children in common. And again, domestic violence, it's not, which you'll learn as we progress, but domestic violence is not a anger management issue. It's not a substance abuse issue. While substance abuse could potentially intensify the domestic violence, at the core of it, it's all about power and control, to gain power and control over one intimate partner. Just some quick stats for you guys. 1 in 3 women in the US have experienced some form of domestic violence. 1 in 4 men have experienced a form of domestic violence, and 1 in 3 teens. As I mentioned in the beginning, we service anybody regardless of whether it's a male or whether it's a female. 1 in 4 men is the stat in the US today. Please know that when it comes to our safe housing, we do house men in our domestic violence shelter as well. I put that out there right now very early on because that's one question that I tend to get is, where does Marjorie Mason Center house men? And so that too, along with our mission statement, is fairly young. I think we've been doing that for about 10 to 12 years now, where we've housed men together in the same shelter as those that identify as women. Prior to that, we still serviced and we still supported men that were impacted by domestic violence, but we housed them separately. With some grant changes and law changes that pivoted our direction. And then I had mentioned 1 in 3 teens. I highlight this everywhere I go now, regardless of the platform I'm on or who I'm speaking to. I think it's important to note that it doesn't just happen to adults, domestic violence. It can happen to teens. And unfortunately, in the last, I would say 2 years alone, we have seen an intense amount, a significant increase in teens, in minors impacted and experiencing domestic violence, meaning they are the primary victim of domestic violence. So we're getting called out to schools. We have a great partnership with the school district, which I'll take you through in a little bit. But we get called out on school campuses through our crisis response team. We get called either by the school or by the minor or by a parent or a relative of the minor, informing us of the fact that they are going through a domestic violence situation. And so just as we would with an adult, we do provide services, including restraining order services to minors as well. Some more stats for you when it comes to female domestic violence survivors. Most women affected by intimate partner violence first experienced it before the age of 25. So kind of pivoting off of what I just said about teens, most of them, so as we get adults that come through our doors at 30, 35 years old, when we're looking at the history and the continuum of violence that they've experienced, most of them tell us that they started experiencing domestic violence when they were teens. A lot of them, about 90% of them, probably higher than that, have all experienced domestic violence as they were growing up. We know that domestic violence is a generational cycle. And so if you grew up in a home where violence was prevalent, then you are 50 times more likely to become a direct victim yourself and or the perpetrator, the one causing the harm, or sometimes both. Domestic violence in Fresno County, I've always said not a stat that we are proud of, but I've changed my language just a little bit, actually after an event that we held for the Project First Step anniversary. It could be that for Fresno County, we see the highest rates of domestic violence in Fresno County compared to any other county in California, even surpassing Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Diego. And I say, again, it's high. Every year we come in at the top of the list as experiencing the most calls to law enforcement for domestic violence. And even though I say it's not a stat that we're completely proud of, I do have to say that it could mean that there's more folks reaching out for help as well. And so again, every year we're following the trends and we're following the leads and the stats, and Fresno County does come in at the highest rates. For Marjorie Mason Center, what does that mean as far as our own impact and inflow? We are the only domestic violence, comprehensively, the only domestic violence service provider in Fresno County. We have other agencies that we work with that do specialize in certain areas of domestic violence or provide certain supportive services when it comes to domestic violence. But for Marjorie Mason Center, we are everything that we do day in and day out, from emergency services through the whole continuum of restraining orders and advocacy, children's services. We are the only dedicated domestic violence service provider here. If you have looked at our website at all, and if you haven't, I encourage everybody to go and take a look at it. Over the last 2 years, I would say about 2 years ago, we started an initiative alongside the Fresno Police Department and all of the other local law enforcement agencies in Fresno County that you see here on your screen. Prior to this dashboard, Marjorie Mason Center retrieved the data regarding domestic violence on an annual basis by the Department of Justice website from a state level to a national level. And what we soon found was that Fresno County didn't have a hub, didn't have a place where they were capturing what does the impact and what does the influx of calls look like for Fresno County, just us, besides having to go and look at a national or state level. And so what we did about 2 years ago is, alongside these police departments, we created what's called the Fresno County Domestic Violence Data Dashboard. And what that dashboard tells us, and this is just a glimpse here, what that dashboard tells us is the different cities within Fresno County, the different law enforcement agencies within Fresno County, and how many calls and reports and incidences are they receiving on a quarterly basis. And so if you go to the website, there's a heat map, and you can hover over different areas. It will show you age of the victim, whether or not the couple was married or in a dating relationship, race, gender, and all kinds of different other elements that come with it. One of the things that really was surprising to us just in the last year of reporting was, I think that there's still a misconception that domestic violence only happens in relationships where the couple are married. And what we found recently when we pulled that data was that most of the reports that law enforcement across the board were receiving were actually those that were in dating relationships. So that was a pretty surprising stat for us. The other stat that was alarming for us, but it just justified a lot of what I mentioned about teens, is that the rates of teen dating violence, even from a law enforcement side of things, that number tends to be increasing. And so it justified a lot, and it made a lot more sense for us of what we were seeing coming through our doors as well. So the types of abuse, and I am going to ask, so I have on here our crisis response manager, Tiffany, who is on here. She's watching me for training purposes. But Tiffany, if there is something that I'm missing or that's really critical, by all means, chime in, unmute, and chime in at any point. So the types of abuse of domestic violence. So the first thing I'll say is there's also a misconception. So you'll hear me throughout the presentation say, I want to debunk myths as I'm talking and educating everyone. And so when it comes to domestic violence, there's still a misconception that domestic violence is only physical. Could be because of the terminology, because of the words. Whenever we're speaking to clients that walk through our doors, we're having to educate them in the same exact moment that we are getting their story, hearing them out, what's taking place for them. But when they hear the word violence, all they go to all the time is for physical abuse. And I want to make one thing very clear, is that there have been often times when I have been working in front of a client and they have not experienced one bit of physical abuse, but a lot of the other types of abuse were very prevalent in their relationship. And it took a lot of listening and a lot of advocating and a lot of educating to that client in order for them to recognize, oh my goodness, I have been in a very unhealthy relationship, and this is dangerous for me. So with that, I want to take you very quickly down the different types of abuse. For physical, we see a lot of punching, slapping, hitting, burning the victim with cigarette butts, using their vehicle as a form of abuse. During COVID, one of the things that we saw I don't know why we saw, but we did, was with vehicles, victims being thrown out of their vehicle, the abuser whiplashing, so pumping their brakes, speeding, and then pumping their brakes and making the victim hit their head on the dashboard, lighting victims on fire, throwing objects at them. And so the list goes on. That's not a comprehensive list, but those are some of the main critical points of physical abuse that we tend to recognize and see. When it comes to emotional abuse, we see a lot of diminishing one's abilities, putting them down, calling them names. I will say between emotional and psychological abuse, that's the first thing that we hear about when clients are coming and seeking our support, is that within the control tactic and manipulation, a lot of the emotional psychological abuse was at the forefront, even at the very beginning of their relationship with them, and something that maybe they didn't recognize very early on. Like gaslighting goes into play with emotional psychological abuse. We hear oftentimes victims of domestic violence tell us, I can't explain to you what I'm feeling. I just feel like I'm going crazy, like I'm losing it. I feel like my reality isn't my reality. I feel guilty at the same time. And we have to educate them and support them through the fact that they have been psychologically abused, and a lot of manipulation tactics have come into play through the continuum of their relationship with their partner. When it comes to economic abuse, we see a lot of withholding of funds, even if the victim of domestic violence is the sole provider. We see that often. Is the sole provider the only one working, whether that's they're working one job or they're working two jobs? The abuser in this case still has control over the finances. And so, control over the bank accounts, have control over the bills. When it comes to economic abuse, what we hear often too is the racking up of debt. The victim's credit being shot because of the abuser in this case. When it comes to victims of domestic violence, and as we are sitting with them and exploring their options and seeing where the gaps are, where the barriers are, housing, as we see today, especially everywhere, housing is an issue all the time, but say about 99.9% of the time. And unfortunately, when it comes to volatile relationships, the person in control not only diminishes and ruins their credit, but we will see multiple evictions on a credit report for a victim of domestic violence. And so the ability to help them sustain housing even after they seek services with us, man, sometimes it's almost near impossible. Sometimes we have to work with a lot of private landlords, but it's not uncommon for us to see multiple evictions on a report for a client. The other piece of that, not just on housing, but economic abuse, utilities aren't paid. Sometimes abuser will use the manipulation tactics to say, do you want me to pay the rent or do you want me to pay the lights? Which one do you want? And so sometimes we'll see that they'll come in even with a large balance for utilities. And so again, when we're talking about housing and obtaining security and stability, maybe they're being approved for housing, but unfortunately they have an outstanding or a bill in collections for electricity. And so we're having to help navigate them through all of that and see where we can provide support. Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is prevalent in domestic violence relationships, along with everything else. Unwanted touching, forcing of having sexual relations with their partner, rape. A lot of the times when married clients come in and they've experienced an immense amount of sexual abuse, again, that manipulation of, but I'm married to them. Maybe I had to. I felt like I had to since I was married to them. And so we're having to educate them that no, right? No means no. If you did not want to, you did not have to engage in it. And having to bring to reality that they may have possibly been raped in their relationship. Within sexual and psychological abuse, we see a lot of withholding of contraceptives. Worked with plenty of clients throughout my time that not just have one children, but have multiple, 3, 5, 6. I think the most number of children one client has had in the time that I've worked with clients is up to 11 children, all under the age of 13, 14 years old. And so usually when I'm in front of folks, I ask like, how many people have children, and how many have 4, 5, 6, and I always say I have 2, and 1 was hard and 2 are hard, but imagine 11. And so for a victim of domestic violence, everything I just mentioned about economic abuse and housing insecurities and the racking of debt, in addition to having multiple children and having to go obtain employment, they feel hopeless, because all of these barriers, it's just one wall after another after another. One of the things we educate a lot about is when it comes to that control piece, part of that tactic and part of the goal for someone that is abusing another person is diminishing them at any cost, breaking them down so much, not just psychologically and not just emotionally, but spiritually, physically, not feeling like they have anybody at the end of the day, and isolating them from their family and friends in order to maintain that control. And the more that they can do that, they know the less likely that the person being harmed is leaving and reaching out for help. Technology and stalking, when it comes to technology and stalking, we're in a day and age where, man, technology is in everything that we do. We're learning a lot about AI in the domestic violence world right now, and it is a scary thing. And so when it comes to technology, a lot of victims of domestic violence are being tracked. It's not uncommon that abusers put trackers in their cars, put trackers in their purses, instill trackers in their phones. Now more than ever, especially during court, during the restraining order process, we're learning more and more about tracking devices that are being placed on victims of domestic violence so they can track their every location. Worked with a client recently where the relationship had ended months previously to them obtaining their restraining order, but this person was still stalking them. This person was still trying to control them, and still trying to harm them. And the way that they inflicted that was they had a tracker that this young lady, could not find in her car at all. And it wasn't until the day of the restraining order that they finally, the abuser in this case finally fessed up on where they kept this tracking device. And I wish I had a example to show you guys, but these trackers, they are very small, and they could be put in places that you wouldn't even think to look. And so when victims are coming in, we are educating them on that, turning off their locations, their notifications, deactivating social media for a little while, because part of the other piece of domestic violence abuse is stalking them by way of social media, pretending to be them to lure friends in order for them to gain information. And then lastly, the spiritual and cultural piece is prevalent. Regardless of what faith or cultural practices one plays, the abuser in this case will use all of their faith, all of their cultural norms, if you will, and turn everything against them. One of the examples that I usually give when it comes to spiritual is for a person of faith, a lot of the time an abusive person will recite passages from the Bible and say, it is your wifely duty to be submissive to your husband. And so that's just one example, they'll use their faith-based practices against them in order to make them feel like they are doing something wrong, or that they are not being true to their faith if they leave this relationship. The cycle of abuse, before I get into this, one of the things that I wanted to mention when it comes to abuse and domestic violence in general is the most dangerous time for anybody to leave an abusive relationship in any part of the relationship is the most abusive time, not abusive, I'm sorry, the most dangerous time for anyone to leave an abusive relationship is when they do leave. And the reason for that is because when we talk about power and control, one of the things we always educate clients on is they may know this person, they may have grown up with this person, they may have been with this person for many years and feel as though they know their every move, they know their every look. And while that's true because they've had to survive their relationship for so long, the moment that they leave and they try to gain their own control back is when we see the abuser in this case just explode. And we see, and I say we, but the victim of domestic violence sees that they don't know what they're capable of fully until they leave. And so oftentimes it becomes a bit of a double-edged sword for a victim of domestic violence, because they feel like if they leave, or if they've tried to leave so they know what's ahead of them, it's easier or safer, if you will, for them to stay because they know what they're capable of while they're there in the relationship, versus the unknown and the insafety, the insecurity factor of not knowing what they're going to do if they leave. And so whenever we see a victim leave, even if it's coming to us, or even if it's leaving to a family member's house or trying to seek safety somewhere else, we unfortunately see the physical abuse escalate, and the lethality risk, the risk of them losing their life to domestic violence, just increases tenfold. And so when someone is actively getting a restraining order, even in court, even when they're in court and the abuser shows up, and for those of you that have been in domestic violence court hearings for restraining orders, the victim of domestic violence has to sit there with the abuser on the other side, and they have to give their testimony, if you will, to the judge as to why they are seeking this restraining order. And so as they are doing that, they're taking back their control at the same time, but yet abuser on this end maybe sitting there calm, cool, and collected, but then after it's all over, we have seen plenty of times where the abuse has just has not been good, has been very, very lethal after, even with the restraining order. I'm sad to report that we've lost a lot, more than one is a lot, but we've lost more than one client that we've worked with to domestic violence, even after the restraining order was granted, which shows how prevalent and how lethal their safety is at risk after they leave. So this is the cycle of violence. This is what keeps that abuse going. And so first things first, right, is we got the honeymoon phase, the honeymoon stage, which is you're getting to know each other, those feel good feelings. I like this person, they like me, and the relationship progresses. Not a lot of clients see this, but even in the honeymoon stage, there can be little signs that could be picked up. You don't see that. That's masked with all those feel good feelings, like I said. And then as the relationship progresses, and when I say progresses, depending on the person, I could be talking about 2 months later, I could be talking about 3 months later, I could be talking about 6 months later. But depending on the person who's doing the abusing on the other end, you start to see tension building. So this feels like a lot of stress. This feels like walking on eggshells a lot of the time. We see more control being instilled during the tension building phase, and the abusive partner shows a higher need for power and control. What the victim may think as, oh, they're worried about me because they want to know where I'm at every 5 minutes, is really in turn showing the control that they are trying to instill in them. Going back to the honeymoon phase, that piece too is just a huge grooming phase in order to gain the control of the victim. And then you got the acute explosion. And so this is the part where the partner takes complete control of the relationship. A lot of people think when you hear acute explosion, you think it's a boom, you think it's physical abuse, you think it's things being thrown at this person. But no, acute explosion is they've taken complete control of the relationship, whether that's by way of threats, whether that's by way of putting them down, calling them names, keeping them isolated in their home, keeping them isolated away from family or friends, diminishing their relationships with family and friends. And then the abuse just keeps going. Honeymoon is right after acute again. They want to keep them there. They want to show them that they're remorseful. The honeymoon phase is also a very volatile phase because it keeps the denial going. And you see that in the middle here. And by denial, I mean, for a victim of domestic violence, the honeymoon phase is who they want this person to be. The honeymoon phase is who they knew this person to be when they first met them and when they first fell in love with them, when they first wanted to start a relationship with them. So part of this love bombing and part of this manipulation is, my reality is I believe you're somebody that you're not. And so for a lot of the trainings that we conduct from a clinical standpoint, a lot of things going on psychologically, a lot of rewiring that has to be conducted when it comes to having to heal from such a traumatic relationship. And it all goes back to that. Some obstacles to leaving a domestic violence relationships. So we have, by all means, this is not an exhaustive list. If I always ask in the beginning, I completely forgot to ask, but I always say, I should say a statement that if you've ever thought in your mind before, man, why doesn't that person just leave? Why doesn't that person just, if the abuse is so bad, why don't they just stop, just leave, just get help? And so I'm hoping that today, after today, even just with a little bit that I've shared, you can change your mindset just a little bit if you've ever thought that, because regardless of what we know, regardless of even just myself or how educated we are on domestic violence, one thing is for sure, and that is there is a reason for everything. There is a reason why someone does not leave a domestic violence relationship. And those reasons are beyond us sometimes. And so when it comes to obstacles of that we don't see, is situational factors, so economic dependence on abusers. So maybe when it comes to the control, the victim in the domestic violence situation isn't the one working because they've prevented them from working or going to school, any interaction with the outside community, any interaction with obtaining resources. And so they are now dependent on this person, and they feel like they can't do anything without them because they hold the control of the financial resources. Lack of awareness of resources, I just went into that. Again, when you isolate someone and take all that control, the person that is being harmed has no knowledge, or very minimal, I should say, of the resources available to them. A lot of the times when we get clients that come to us for the very first time, they say, I had no idea that you guys even existed. Sometimes we're helping clients sign up or enroll for CalWORKs, for AID, for CalFresh, because they had no idea of those resources at hand. Social isolation is through the entirety of the relationship. The abusive partner controls where they go, who they see, who they talk to. And most of the time we see that they're just isolated to specific places by permission of that abusive person. Children is huge. Children should be at probably the first bullet point here. When it comes to children, a lot of victims of domestic violence, for a variety of reasons, will not leave. And that is one, because they feel like they can't do it on their own without the children. Two, abusive partner threatens to take the children from them, threatens to take custody, threatens to lawyer up, as they say, and gain the children, make the court or make the judge believe that they're unfit as a parent, and will often threaten to gain custody of them. When it comes to clients that don't have some immigration barriers in front of them, and they don't have a legal status here, but yet maybe abusive partner does, they will use not only their legal status, but they will use the children as well, as a form of control. And some psychological factors at the top of the list is always fear and anxiety of the physical danger. And that's what I made mention about when it comes to leaving the relationship. They don't know. They would rather stay because they can gauge, if you will, what's going to happen next versus leaving and not knowing if they're going to be in greater physical danger. Fear of the unknown, a lot of self-blame and shame. In that cycle that I just showed you guys, denial was in the middle of all of that. And part of that denial is that self-blame of, is this my fault? Because that's what I've been told this entire time. If I just didn't do this, or maybe if I would have listened here, or maybe if I would have been a better partner or spouse, maybe things would have been differently. And then shame for a lot of victims of domestic violence, shame, feeling a sense of embarrassment and shame, especially with their family, right? And depending on their cultural norms or their faith-based practices, if it is frowned upon to get divorced, they more than likely will not want to take those steps, because again, when we're talking about psychological tactics, the abusive partner will use that against them. Insecurity and demolished self-esteem. Usually when we are getting clients at our doors, they are not only at their most vulnerable moments and at the most unsafe moments, but they have been ripped of their self-esteem, of their self-worth. If we're lucky enough to work with them for a long period of time, that transformation that we see is incredible for someone that really sticks to it and has gone through the resources. The transformation of seeing them so down on themselves and so broken to gaining their control back. It just looks very different, and it's very um, bittersweet, if you will, compared to when they first came in. Loyalty and guilt. At the end of the day, we see this a lot in relationships, especially if we're talking about a relationship where they've been together since, high school, or they've been together for 20 plus years. They are loyal to this person that they're with. When we talk about psychological abuse again and emotional abuse, sometimes the abusive partner may have experienced a lot of trauma themselves within their childhood. Maybe they do not have family members or friends or a support system. So they're always using that as a tactic to keep the victim alongside them or with them. And so the victim then in turn feels very loyal, like they're the only ones that can help this individual. And a sense of guilt, and a guilt in breaking up the family, guilt in leaving, guilt in a failure of the marriage or relationship. And then again, social isolation. And then some other factors that we go into are unable to use resources. Normalization of violence. We see that often with again, generational cycles. So if I grew up in a house where, my caretakers, there was domestic violence, I'm going to live my life thinking that that's just the way that relationships are. And when that happens, it's normal for me. I don't know anything other than that. In fact, we've had plenty of times where clients have come back just to give us an update on how they're doing since leaving the relationship and some time has passed. And I've had plenty of conversations with clients where they have said, Leticia, I'm in a new relationship now, but something feels off. And I'm thinking, oh goodness, they're in another unhealthy relationship, because that happens as well. But in fact, what sometimes I hear is this, no, this person's calm. This person allows me autonomy. This person doesn't really ask where I'm at every other minute. And so again, going back to that wiring, they're not used to it. They're used to the chaos. They're used to the abuse. And for them, that's normal. Um, a lot of family pressure. Again, I've already talked about just the cultural norms and spiritual norms. I'm going to skip over one for just a second and come back to that. But promises of change ties into that honeymoon stage. I won't do this again. I'm going to get help. I think I just need to go into a recovery program. And so they hold on to that hope that they're going to change, and then reinforces helplessness, simple exhaustion, and rationalizing and minimizing. When it comes to simple exhaustion, I've worked with plenty of clients that have been in their 60s and their 70s. I think the eldest I've worked with is probably about 76, 77. And they were married for, 40 years. And I remember this one in particular looking at me and saying, Leticia, I'm just exhausted. I've dealt with this for so long and I just don't want to do it anymore. I'd rather just stay and deal with it. It's too exhausting to think of anything else, or to think I don't feel like I have enough help or support. I'm just completely exhausted. And the one that I skipped over was love. And the reason I skipped over it is because whenever I talk about love with whether that's other community partners or just in conversations, people can't seem to understand the concept of how do you love someone that has hurt you so much. And so I can't explain it. Only that person that is going through it understands the love that they feel for this person. And that doesn't go away even after they leave the relationship. It takes quite some time, if ever, before they lose love, if you will, or they begin to heal away from that relationship. When it comes to exposure, we cannot forget that this is not, the domestic violence just doesn't impact the primary victim. Domestic violence impacts everyone, but especially the children. And so at the Marjorie Mason Center, we make sure to provide a wraparound supportive services to even the children that are exposed to domestic violence. A lot of the times we get clients that come in that say, well, I had my children in the room. Or they were asleep when it happened, and we have to educate them and let them know that they were exposed. They can hear it. They know what's going on. And so a lot of the time, especially when I first started at the Marjorie Mason Center, with the resources that we had in play at the time, as we should, these services were focused a lot on the primary victim, the adult in this case. And what we later found was that a lot of the children that were coming in were viewed as appendages to the adult, to the parent. And I don't want to say that they slipped through the cracks, but they could easily slip through the cracks if we're not intentional about the services that they provide, but more so if we're not intentional about knowing and realizing and being aware that they too are not just exposed but impacted. And if there's no interventions or no support for the children, then the likelihood of them experiencing a domestic violence relationship themselves, or experiencing lifelong chronic illnesses or mental health issues just increases tenfold as well. So again, when it comes to children, they may hear one parent assault the other or live with the aftermath. Many children are affected by hearing threats to the safety of their caregiver. And then children who live with domestic violence are also at increased risk of becoming direct victims of abuse. When specifically in our shelter setting, so we offer a variety of resources, but if I focus on our shelter setting for just a minute, I will never forget an instance where the shelter after a certain hour is very quiet, and we have 140 beds in that shelter at 40 rooms, so 40 households. And so, I was working one night and I heard this little one, and he just would not stop crying. And fast forward later, what we literally found through the help of our clinical department was he couldn't stop crying when the house went silent. And he couldn't stop crying because when the house went silent, that was fearful for him. That instilled fear. He was used to the chaos. He was used to the commotion that happened in his house. And so for him, the quietness and what one would say, the safety of what was taking place for him in that moment was so foreign and so unknown that his anxiety just increased. So the exposure and the impact of domestic violence for children um, affect them each quite differently. So almost half of the children who witness domestic violence intervene in some way. And so with some research, 49.9% yelled for abuser to stop, 43.9% tried to get away, and then we have 23.6% who have actually called for help. When we're safety planning with victims of domestic violence, we're also ensuring in our children's department is also ensuring to safety plan or help them safety plan with their children. At the top of the list is always safety planning for that little one, regardless of the age, to never try to get involved in maybe a physical altercation, but definitely teaching them how to get help if help is needed. So when it comes to our services, I mentioned we offer a variety. We are 24/7, and with that, I mean we have a 24/7 amazing team of crisis support staff, and that is through our crisis response department that are willing and ready and able to take to help anybody in need that is experiencing a domestic violence situation, whether that is by way of our 24/7 helpline. They can call at any moment's notice. Everything is confidential. They do not have to give their name if they are not comfortable to do so. And they get an advocate over the end of that phone. And the advocate is there to support and listen and to provide them with resources, but most importantly, to safety plan with them in order to help keep them safe. Because we know on this end that any person that is in a volatile relationship, the abuse will increase and the abuse will not stop because of that power and control. And the last thing we want is for another person to lose their life to domestic violence. And so we're safety planning with them above all, even if they're not accepting or ready, I should say, to receive services. Within our crisis response department, I'm going to go into it a little bit more with a couple more slides, but we have our advocates that are proficient and specialized in the restraining order process. They also are assigned to the domestic violence court hearings every single day, Monday through Friday. And Tiffany, shake your head yes or no. I think more than how many courtrooms do we have now that we're in? 8? 8 courtrooms that we're in, which has increased since I've gotten here. And so more folks are reaching out for help. And at the same time, when we are in those courtrooms, the advocates are intersecting and meeting clients that haven't even stepped foot in our doors. So maybe they filed their petition on their own. And so we're making sure that we reach those folks as well. We have the Prevention and Education and Outreach Department. This is the team. I always say that they are the face on the outside for Marjorie Mason Center. They are out educating the community, doing trainings like this on domestic violence, healthy relationships, and so forth. But one big program that we do have that we are super proud of is the prevention side of things. Fresno Unified is the largest school district, and we do have a contract with them that allows us to be on their middle school and high school campuses, educating youth and educating students about domestic violence. In fact, there's been plenty of times where students have come up to this team and have either, one, have said they have been a victim of domestic violence, and then two, we've had a couple that have come up and said, man, I feel like I'm the toxic person in this relationship. One thing I failed to mention is, I'm sure you all are aware, but anyone can, as young as 12, can file for a petition for a domestic violence restraining order. We have our children's enrichment, which I spoke a little bit about. We have a team, a department that is dedicated just to the children, not just in our safe house, but from a community-wide perspective as well. So any client that is connected to us that also would like services for their children, this team focuses on the children. So we're mirroring the services that we offer to the adult down to the children, obviously age appropriate and so forth, but counseling, case management, advocacy in general, connecting with the schools, and so forth. And then we have our counseling services. So we have clinicians that provide individual counseling services to both the adults and the children, family counseling. We have paid clinicians, and then we also have a trainee program where we're receiving students that are in their practicum or in close to their licensure for clinical work. And then we have safe housing. You heard me mention earlier, we have a emergency shelter. It is the only domestic violence shelter in Fresno County, and it is the largest in the state as far as shelter. We have 140 plus beds at 40 rooms. Folks that are fleeing or attempting to flee a domestic violence situation, meaning they are getting out, they need to get out, they have nowhere else to go because maybe that person knows exactly where they're at, can come and get assessed through the crisis response team. And be assessed for safe housing. And if that's the case and they come in, then they get their own room. Them and their children get wraparound services while in the safe house, which does include every single thing that I mentioned here already as far as services. And they get a case manager that works directly with them. The stay is up to 30 days. And while that seems short, and it is because who can really do anything in 30 days, especially when you have all these barriers in front of you, we do extend that out on a case-by-case basis depending on each individual unique situation. So a little bit diving deeper, because this is the department that intersects a lot with Project First Step, that intersects a lot with the CCLS team. Who makes up this team? And so we have crisis response advocates. These are our front lines at our community resource location. You do not need an appointment to come in. Again, they're operating that 24/7 helpline. They're also responding if anybody comes into our building needing support, needing services, or just needing to talk. So we do have a crisis response team that is round the clock, 24/7. We have client navigators. We have about 4 of them. I call them our crisis response on wheels. They're doing everything that they would do here, but they're going out into the community. So if anybody, another community partner, law enforcement calls and asks for a client navigator to respond out, they are responding out and taking the services on the road with them. The reason why we developed this position was, again, when we talk about barriers for victims of domestic violence, sometimes when we talk about we need to meet them where they're at, we are being literal when we say that. And so if we have another community partner where they've already told their story to, we're going to reduce the barrier of them having to come to us, and we're going to go straight to them and offer all the services that we possibly can to them. Then we have the victim advocate role. You see those broken up into 2, I always say, specialized units. We have the victim advocates that are stationed at our Fresno Police Department. We have 2 of them. They are assigned to the Fresno Police Department, meaning if Fresno PD goes out to a domestic violence call, a field response, and if it's safe to do so, they will dispatch the victim advocate to go out and to meet with the victim while they're there on scene, again, to educate them on the services, to educate them on their rights, to safety plan with them, to talk to them about the restraining order process and so forth. We know when law enforcement gets involved that it is a very critical time and the most dangerous time for a victim. So we want to be sure to catch them in that moment. So that way they're more open to receiving services. And then we have the victim advocate and the legal service side, which I talked about. These are the advocates that solely focus on the restraining orders assigned to court, making referrals over to Project First Step and so forth. So again, their role as a crisis response advocate is to provide that 24/7 crisis support, to offer safe housing should the client want to come into a confidential shelter, offer counseling services, and offer legal advocacy. I talked about client navigators, community partners, partnering with community partners, and law enforcement partnerships. Talked about that one already. Victim advocates in the court system, again, they specialize in the family court process. They're available to support with restraining orders and court accompaniment. We offer a legal options educational course every Tuesday at 10 a.m. at our Clovis location, every Wednesday at 6 p.m. and Thursday at 10 a.m. in Fresno. What this class does is it offers that first hour of education on what is a restraining order, what is a domestic violence restraining order, what is the process, and then after that, it's, if the client chooses to stay behind, it is a workshop, if you will, on how to help the client complete that petition. We will do the footwork, and by we, I mean this team, will do the footwork for the client as far as if they have filled out the petition, the advocate has looked it over, given recommendations if they need to, they will take it and submit it to the courthouse for the client. They will pick it up for them. They will let them know once the order has been returned with a status. They will let them know when their court hearing is, whether it was temporarily granted or temporarily denied. And then through this process, the legal advocates are probably making recommendations on can we see about the resource through Project First Step. Maybe this client could benefit from receiving legal services through an attorney. And so this entire team, it's an assessment process the entire way in offering that supportive service. We do offer one-on-one services for domestic violence restraining orders for a variety of reasons. Maybe there's a language barrier, maybe there's a variety of barriers. We do definitely offer one-on-one services for restraining orders when it comes to minors. So we're very intentional about working with minors and making sure we can translate the material and the process in a way that they understand. Because one thing is it's a very intimidating process and scary process for an adult to go through this. Imagine, a 15-year-old trying to go through this on their own. And so we want to be very intentional about making sure the support is there. And then the advocates are going to see them through the entire way from beginning to end for their restraining order. So this is not an exhaustive list by whatsoever, but just some things that we have taken note over the years as far as when Project First Step gets involved and a client of ours is able to receive that legal representation in time from you all. Some of the things that we see that they need help with navigating through when it comes to their restraining orders, or I should say the barriers that they're experiencing when it comes to navigating their restraining order, is they're experiencing an immense amount of financial barriers. They could be experiencing immigration issues. There could be some child custody, divorce, or shared assets that go into this. The severity of abuse is just unimaginable. It's very severe. There's some language barriers. Sometimes there's some disability barriers. I know over the last year alone, we've had a lot of ASL clients that have just had one disability after the other. Abuser, this is a big one that we often see. Abuser in the case has obtained legal representation and is now using this as another form of control towards the victim, to where the victim just stops, just recants, doesn't follow through. Because of the fear of the other side, where the attorney on the other side is even instilling some fear or control trying to get the victim to not follow through with the restraining order and intimidating the victim. And then above all, victims have lost their voice through the trauma and need advocacy support and guidance through the legal system regardless, because we know one thing with domestic violence is it does strip one's voice away and autonomy away, regardless of how many barriers they have in front of them. So how do you connect? How do you connect with Marjorie Mason Center to how do you connect a victim to DV services to Marjorie Mason Center? So first things first, while responding out to a call, an individual discloses they are experiencing abuse from an intimate partner. So we get the domestic violence that is disclosed. When officers are responding out, a lethality assessment is conducted. And so that is one thing that I forgot to mention early on is with Fresno PD specifically and Reedley PD, and now Clovis PD, right, Tiffany? And now Clovis PD. They do conduct at the scene of a domestic violence situation what's called a lethality assessment. And these are a number of predictors to show that the increased risk of homicide of someone losing their life to domestic violence. And so the more boxes you check on that lethality assessment only shows that you're at greater risk of losing your life. And so the officers will conduct that lethality assessment. And if the victim screens in, meaning they hit a mark where it shows they're at high lethality, the officer, if they haven't already, will contact us. We'll safety plan with them, and then will contact us to respond out or to provide support, even if over the phone through MMC. And then advocates will speak to the victim. They'll get their story as much as the client is willing to share. We will not probe on their story, but as much as they're willing to share. And the advocate at that point, step 5, will connect to services and whatever those services look like. And as you saw, we have an array of services. And then everybody else for non-law enforcement, we have an MMC email. We have a 24/7 helpline. An advocate will ask for a brief synopsis of what's taking place. And then depending on what is taking place, the advocate will guide them from there and provide them with the appropriate resources and support, whether that's internally, externally, or both. And then lastly, oh, I think I am on time, like 1 minute to spare. And then lastly, stay informed. These are our social media links. We have one for our general website and Marjorie Mason Center. And then you heard me talk about our No More program through the schools, reaching students, reaching minors, those that may have been impacted by domestic violence. And so we have QR codes for both of those. Any questions? I think that takes me to my end.
Thank you, Leticia.
Looks like